After my father died, I was looking through his papers and I came across a tiny journal that he'd had with him when he was a prisoner of war. Leafing through the pages, I could see where he'd been and I could sense the feelings that he had. This led me to look into his history and to research his experiences as a Far East prisoner of war. In 2004, I met up with my daughter who was travelling. We met in Bangkok and we travelled to Kanchanaburi and to the camps where he had been a prisoner. And the drawings and the photographs that I took during that trip were what inspired me and led me to make a series of work, and I've been working on it ever since. I started feeling that perhaps there was a part of my father that I hadn't known when he was alive. And that really gave me the desire to look further and to try and tell his story the way he would have liked it told. The landscape in Thailand had really inspired me, and my first thought was to connect the landscape as it is now with the writing of my father, his beautiful handwriting, and also to connect with the few little bits and pieces that he'd brought back from that time. So I wanted to combine paint with text and with imagery. One thing I found in his little treasure trove of memorabilia from the time was a little piece of fabric. I later discovered that the writing inside the symbol means prisoner in ancient Japanese, and here we have the word number and 2, which I assume means number 2 camp from Nom Pladuk, which is where he was. I believe that that was a badge that my father had to wear when he left the camp. Now, I used this little image as a motif throughout my work. And my first painting was this word prisoner on an abstract canvas, which was about the capitulation, about the fall of Singapore. And that one painting led me to do more work, to look at the various stages and the different camps he was in and the different things he did. And each painting connected with either his text or the landscape or some of the feelings that I imagined when I was painting. I wanted them to be visually pleasing. I wanted them to be something that I'd be happy to have on my wall and that I hoped other people would want to hang on theirs. I wanted to reflect the beauty of the landscape. I wanted to create something in my own style. Here's an example of one of the paintings from my series. It's called Embankment, and it's from an image I took in the jungle of the railway embankment from the Thai-Burma Railway, which of course no longer exists. These long bamboo poles were probably part of the structure of the embankment, and they're still there. And this is my chop or signature, which I have on all my paintings. And in the bottom right-hand corner is a collaged copy of part of the transcript from my father's journal, recording the date that the rest of the regiment left the base camp and moved up to the jungle to work on the railway. A lot of the people who've bought my paintings relating to the Far East prisoner of war story also have a personal connection, perhaps a father or a relative who was a prisoner.
I've known Sally for a long time. I followed in her footsteps and her father's steps to Thailand to see where the railway had been built. And when she showed me her original ideas for this picture, I thought it summed up perfectly the contrast between the beautiful landscape of Thailand, where people are working in the fields, the river runs through, and the experience that our fathers had of being imprisoned in trucks on their way to they knew not what fate. And I just think the amazing framing of that landscape, that misty, perfect landscape, the hills in the background, and the severity of those doors and the darkness that they must have been feeling inside and not knowing what fate had in store for them. I think this picture says it all.
Sally's art in particular, for me, encapsulates the feelings that I have about my father being a prisoner of war, because her own father was a prisoner of war, and so we get it, we have a connection in that way. And so anything that she has painted, I know, comes from the same background as mine. I've recently bought one of Sally's very impressive paintings. It consists of 4 squares which she put together, and it's of the bridge on the River Kwai, and each painting is slightly different. It starts darker and then they gradually go lighter, and on each painting she has transcribed her father's words of the poem If by Rudyard Kipling, which apparently was very important to him. And as the images go lighter, the words become stronger and you can read them more carefully, which I think implies that his memory fades and he becomes more sure of who he is. So for me, the darkness to light resonates for me because I see that as my father's experience, which is that the spiritual side of life revived when they're under these terrible conditions. And he said, you saw men as they actually were. And he actually said later that that was the most wonderful time of his life. Because, you know, people were real, he said. People were real, and they had a faith, and that's what he had.
I've got plenty of plans for the future, and I'm hoping to produce another 4 or 5 canvases in the next 6 months. In 2018, I went to Singapore for the first time and was able to research the first 8 months of my father's time as a prisoner. And I've also been looking into the Ubon camp, where he and his regiment were for the last 6 months of the war, and where they were when the Japanese surrendered. So I've got plenty of work still to do. I also want to look at other aspects of his time when he was in Thailand that I didn't know when I first made the work. And so I've been doing extra research into that as well. I'm also planning several relief and intaglio prints, which will be more general, and I can't wait to show them to everyone.